your mind back to 2006, if you're old enough to do that, and the Peugeot 207 had just come out. It was the Peugeot 206 Plus One, and it was Plus One in every way. It was bigger, heavier, fatter, and also safer. So on the positive side, it was safer. But otherwise, possibly a step in the wrong direction for driving dynamics. In 2006, Peugeot had not yet come out with a GTI version. That was yet to come. So the GTI wasn't available at the time of launch. The closest thing you could buy was this, the car I'm in today, the 1.6 turbo GT with 150 brake horsepower. Now, a year later in 2007, the GTI would be released, which has 175 horsepower. But for that year, this was the hottest 207 you could buy. The engine in this car is the most interesting part because Peugeot had a little bit of a partnership with BMW at the time and worked with them to build the engine in this car. Essentially, the bits that BMW did are the valve timing and the interesting part, which is the turbo, and it's a twin scroll turbo. Now I was thinking, I'll just quickly look up what a twin scroll turbo is and I'll explain it to you guys. Now, it turns out it's not that simple, not a simple explanation.
So what we've got going on here is...
Result is that this car, max torque is available from 1400 RPM and most of it from a little over idle. So it pulls from almost any RPM. So it definitely improves the drivability of this car, makes it very easy to drive. So the 207 was produced from 2006 through till 2014. This particular model, the GT, was only made from around 2006 to 2008, so it was quite an unusual car. The GT was also possible to buy with a diesel engine, but that didn't really suit the aspirations of the GT line because it was only 110 horsepower, so it would have been quite slow. So in terms of performance, if you're after the diesel, then don't listen to anything I say about performance here because it's not going to match what you get from the diesel. Now, with this being the GT model, it was very understated. There's not a lot that gives it away. There were only 3-door bodies available, and it had a slightly meaner looking front end, but overall it's very difficult to tell. So if you're after a bit of a sleeper, this car might be the one. As I mentioned, 150 horsepower, 0 to 60 in about 8 seconds, and 130 miles an hour top speed. Some first impressions, and it's often the case with French cars, they are usually cheaper to buy. They also tend to look slightly more expensive than they are. So I would say that this car, it looks more expensive than it is. Certainly both from the outside and the inside. Just glancing at this interior, it looks the part. The problem is that they tend not to be quite so well screwed together. So although they look nice, they're not necessarily that solid. I think this car, from some angles, it looks quite good, and then from others, it just shows its weight. It just shows its lardiness, just slightly too much. It's still actually quite a small car by today's standards, and that does make it easy to drive around town. And the steering, I'll have to try and demonstrate this now. It's a one-finger job. Like, I can steer around that corner with one finger because the steering is very light. Time to find out how the 207 GT drives on a slightly more twisty and quicker road. And if I put my foot down, immediately you've got a nice surge of power from the turbo. Now it's 150 horsepower and the car weighs over 1300 kilos, so it doesn't feel like the quickest car I've ever driven, but it does have a nice bit of usable performance from the engine, thanks to that twin scroll turbo. And you might also hear there the dump valve, which is one of a couple of modifications on this car. It's got a cold air intake dump valve and a stainless exhaust, which just gives it a very subtle growl from the rear end. It's not a loud exhaust, but it definitely adds, both the dump valve and the exhaust add to the experience of this car. And I tell you what, it handles nicely. It's surprisingly good to drive this car. I mean, I had read that it was a good car, but I still couldn't quite imagine that it'd be fun. But it grips well, it turns in well, and then there's enough surge of power to pull you out of the corners. Because that steering, which is oh so light, it still manages to feel like the car is doing what you ask it to do, without the any feeling of weight to it. It's just had new discs and pads, and the brakes feel spot on, really good. That dump valve is just hilarious. It does kind of sound like a mouse sneezing, but it's still entertaining. Yeah, it's confidence inspiring. It gets around the corners, you know the brakes will stop you, and yet round town and at lower speeds the ride quality is pretty good. Yeah, it wants to be driven. This particular car is, as I mentioned, the GT model, but in addition to that it's the Sport XS, which I can only assume means sport with extra sport. I'm not sure exactly what that model comes with, but this car has got leather seats, air conditioning, and I think all of the GTs came with 17-inch alloys, which are actually pretty nice looking alloy wheels, I think. But I definitely like this sport with extra sport model. Bit crashy. Oh, it makes a lot of noise when it goes over potholes and bumpy bits of road. Doesn't transfer that into you. It's nice quality ride, but it's quite noisy. The THP engine under that bonnet, it's the nicest looking engine I've seen in a little while. It's just well packaged in there and it looks nice. Most people aren't going to care at all about what an engine looks like under that bonnet, but it looks nice under there. Well packaged and neat. Now at lower RPMs, the engine doesn't sound like much. Then it gets a bit boomy, but that might just be the exhaust. But then once you get to sort of 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, it's got a real nice sound to it actually, which I wasn't expecting because I hadn't heard it at lower speeds. Have a listen to the sneezing mouse. Bless you. Oh, it's childish, but I love it. But it wouldn't be a review of a Peugeot without discussing reliability, and I would say overall, from what I've heard from the owner, it's not been catastrophic, it's not been too bad. Essentially it boils down to, as it often does, the electrics, and the car's needed a new alternator, and it does have a couple of little quirks. Now I'll show you with this driver's window. Oh my god, it's actually worse now. So I can wind this window back up, but I need to do it. Every time I pull the switch, it just goes up by a tiny fraction, and I just need to keep pressing it until, there we go. And now it will not go down. Oh no, there we go. There we go. Okay, so there's something not quite right with that driver's window. Another one was a brake light burning out and having to be replaced a few times. Possibly dodgy earth or something like that. Other than that, the car's been okay. Mechanically pretty reliable. This particular car's done 75,000 miles, so it's fairly low mileage. And the owner picked it up for 1,500 quid. So bit of a bargain really, and I've had a look on Auto Trader now. There's not many of them for sale, but you can get a really nice one for £2,000. This car is kind of perfect for someone who's been driving maybe a couple of years. I mean, if you can get insured on one of these when you first learn to drive, great, go for it. And I think if you have been driving a couple of years, then you should be able to get insured on one of these fairly easily. And it makes a great car to just mess about with, modify, have a bit of fun, twisty roads. It's got the performance. Yeah, a great car for a second car, I would say. Oh, Peugeot 309, very nice. As I mentioned, the steering's quite light, but the clutch is relatively stiff compared to the steering, it's quite heavy, and it also seems to have a fairly low biting point, so that makes it, the clutch at least, feels slightly more sporty. But it's a weird combination of heavy clutch and light steering. And the gear shift is alright. It's fine. It's not slick, a bit notchy, but it does the job. It's one hell of a beat. Lights are still on. Thanks, car. I've just pulled into a Sainsbury's car park, and I thought I'd just have a look around the cabin and see what's what, see what we've got. As I say, it looks fairly decent in here. There's a lot of like shiny chrome silver coloured plastic. It comes with leather seats and aircon. The seats are pretty comfortable and they hold you in as well. They're bolstered, which is nice. What the heck's that? Oh, card holder. Looks like you could your car could take payment here for something. Decent door pockets. You could fit a reasonable sized bottle in there. Cup holders in the middle, but no centre console storage. And then the glove box is typical of some of these French cars which are designed to be left on drive. And basically it's minuscule. There's some pointless weird little cup holders there that you wouldn't be able to fit anything underneath. And then half of the glove box is taken up by the fuse box. I've noticed that the dashboard, this little centre screen here, displays the whole date, the day, the month and the year. Now what I always like doing when there's a year, I tried it on the Vauxhall Corsa recently, is seeing what year it will go up to. How long did Peugeot think this car could potentially last for? And interestingly, in this car you can go to the year 2099. I think the Corsa could only go to 2049, so obviously Peugeot were thinking that this car might last for 100 years, which is optimistic, but you never know. So would I buy one of these cars? And no, probably not aged 30 plus, but if I was 18, yeah, I would have one of these, definitely. I wouldn't have cared about the rattling interior and slightly noisy wind and road noise. I'd have been pretty happy with the performance and the handling. Tell you what, if anyone wants to lend me a 207 GTI for a review, I'd love to have a go in one of them, so get in touch. So that's a quick look at the Peugeot 207 GT, an affordable, warm hatchback, not of the highest quality, but it handles well, it performs well, and it's affordable to buy, so worth looking into if this is your budget. If you've got a budget of 1,500, £2,000, and you can afford the insurance, then definitely worth looking at. Big thanks to Nathan for lending me the car, and thank you to everybody for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.